All right. So starting off this week, instead of a Sunday rundown, we're gonna kind of skip over Sunday. We're gonna do talk about the game from last Thursday, and we're also going to talk about the game from Monday as well. So the Thursday trouncing of the Chargers, and I don't even want to talk about the game too much specifically. I kind of want to talk about like the Chargers in general, and they're in a weird place. You and I have obviously talked about it extensively. Raiders smashed the Chargers 63-21 with it being like 63-7 at one point. The 21 really didn't matter and doesn't matter at all. The record is 5-9 right now. And then the very next morning, they ended up firing the GM and head coach. So Brandon Staley and Tom Telesco. Um, I always have a hard time with the Chargers because we've seen them year after year after year have these talented teams, whether it's offensive, defensive, or even in years past, both, and they don't do anything with it, right? And a lot of people kind of put that in a couple of different places. You say, oh, well, Phillip Rivers wasn't that good, or the coaching wasn't very good, or whatever the case is. Justin Herbert the past couple of years, and it's kind of just been failure after failure after failure. Last year they won 10 games, but then they don't do anything, right? So right now 5-9. Obviously, Justin Herbert is hurt, and the goal of getting back into the playoffs and potential Super Bowl hopes are not going to be easy, especially him coming off of injury and then new coaching regimen coming in, and then on top of that, their stars. They restructured a lot of their contracts last offseason to grab a couple of free agents, Khalil Mack, Joey Bosa, Keenan Allen, and Mike Williams. They restructured just to keep it relatively together. And the cap space is taken up by 58% with just those players alone. You're going to have a hard time kind of getting back into it when you have almost 60% of your cap being eaten by a couple of guys. What are your thoughts about the Chargers right now?
I have to be honest with you. I think their talent is deep. I know that they have some cap hell coming up, but you're talking Mike Williams, Keenan Allen, Joshua Palmer, Quentin Johnson, Gerald Everett, Austin Eckler. That's a deep team. Khalil Mack has had a good season. Joey Bosa is Joey Bosa. Murray, their linebacker, is really good. I think that the Chargers have been like awful for like 15 years. They wasted, Drew Brees was like, I'm out of here. Actually, they kind of got rid of him because of the shoulder injury, but they wasted Phillip Rivers' career. I think honestly that this is an exciting place for a head coach to go. And the thing with the Chargers is they have never fired a coach midseason. It's never happened before. And Spanos came out today, actually. Adam Schefter tweeted, he came out and said, now it's one thing to say, hey, this is what I'm hearing, et cetera, et cetera. When an owner makes a statement to somebody and says, listen, there will be no spending limitations on our next head coach and general manager. That's that LA money rolling in, right? I know they don't have any fans down there or whatever, but they're down in LA. There's some money flowing. They're going to spend some money to bring in a head coach and a general manager. And they're smart enough to figure out the cap and all that other stuff. But this team next year going forward, if you get the right coach in there, should have been Sean Payton. I think he made a mistake. But if you get the right head coach in there going forward, I mean, look at the Chiefs need a big piece to try to be competitive next year. Obviously, it's funny that we say that because they're just kind of rolling. We think they're having a terrible year, but they have a bunch of wins. But what are the Raiders doing next year? Who knows? What are the Broncos doing next year? Who knows? The AFC hasn't panned out as strong this year as we thought it would. The Chargers are in a perfect position if they can be a little aggressive, if they can make some good draft picks. They have 4 stud wide receivers. If Mike Williams comes back or not, that's to be seen. Austin Eckler is awesome. We know what Justin Herbert is. I mean, I think Justin Herbert is a top 5 talent in the league, and I would take him. There's Mahomes and Burrow, who I'm not taking over Herbert if I'm a fan of any other team. I'm taking him over Lamar, taking him over Dak. I'm taking him over everybody except for Brock Purdy. No, I'm just kidding. I'm taking him over Brock Purdy. So it's just one of those things. I think they're set up perfectly to be a good team next year if they make the right decision, if Spanos finally spends some money. And that's not just the head coach and the general manager, man. That's everything. They have the cheapest health staff in the league. They're just cheap. all from
Yep.
top to bottom, the smallest scouting department in the league.
Mm-hmm.
Spend the money, bring in a quality staff, and restore your franchise to something, because right now it's just a joke.
Yeah, and the problem is a couple of the guys that you named off, Austin Eckler, Kenneth Murray, Gerald Everett, and a handful of others, such as Gilman, their safety, Austin Johnson, Michael Davis. They have a couple of prominent role player guys or superstars who are set to be free agents this next year. And on top of the 58% of the cap being eaten up by Khalil Mack, Joey Bosa, Keenan Allen, you also have J.C. Jackson, who is going to eat away another $15 million in dead money. They have $8.1 million in cap space. That's obviously right now. We know that teams move money around. They create more cap space. That's not the final number. But what they do have going from them is that it's not like they're old, right? The Chargers are ranked 12th in snap adjusted age. So the guys who are taking the most amount of snaps compared to their age, not just age of the whole team, because that's going to be different compared to how many snaps those guys are actually taking. And they draft relatively well. In that same draft that they got Justin Herbert, they also got Kenneth Murray, Josh Kelly, and Alohi Gilman, so that safety. They also got Rashawn Slater in the next draft, Asante Samuel Jr., Josh Palmer. 2022 has kind of been it was a little bit underwhelming and disappointing pieces in that draft specifically. And then obviously 2023 is super duper early, but they do have Tuipu Lotu, who's been pretty good this season. Obviously, all those names are hard to say. They own all their draft picks in this next year, so it's not like with teams like with the Broncos, who don't own a lot of their draft picks, like none of their draft picks, or like the Browns, who are maybe getting a couple of those pieces back from the Deshaun Watson trade. And they're going to have a high pick, right? So they have, I think it's 5th overall currently, Marvin Harrison Jr., Brock Bowers, 2 prominent offensive tackles, one from Penn State. Also have Joe Alt from Notre Dame, Keon Coleman, Jared Verse, if you want to go defense. There's Marvin Harrison Jr. is probably going to be gone at that point, but you do have other pieces there that can get Justin Herbert more pieces, more weapons to continue on trying to build him up, to get him pieces around, get some wins. And then on top of that, you have some free agents that are going to be prominent this offseason, potentially T. Higgins. Defensive side, you got Jalen Johnson, L'Jarius Sneed, Kendall Fuller, Chidobe, Awuzie, Kenny Moore, Stephon Gilmore. So their corners, big issue outside of Asante Samuel. The only problem with Asante Samuel is he's a liability in the run game. But outside of that, he's really their only super prominent corner. So stacking up on the free agent side, if they can, would be extremely helpful. And then you did mention with kind of their staffing and how kind of poor it is. There was a survey conducted by the NFLPA. The Chargers received a D- or worse in categories that include treatment of families, nutrition, training room, and locker room. Their strength coaches and team travel were the only categories that received positive marks out of the entire survey. So piss poor across the board. And then on top of that, do free agents really? I mean, I guess it's LA. Like,
no.
And you mentioned
No.
it, like they're in LA, but it's not really an LA team, right? It's like they play 17 road games every single year. I don't think guys want to go over there, just like you said.
The thing about the NFL is you only play one game a week. And so the allure of LA is not what it's like for Shohei Ohtani, who's going to spend, 250 days there a year. It's different. It's only a 17 game season. Chargers don't make the playoffs. So it's, they're not spending any extra time out there. LA doesn't mean anything to them. That cheap ownership does. And you mentioned cap tricks and logistics, and the good teams do it every year. That's if the owner's willing to spend the money, man. He has a high payroll because of revenue sharing, but if you want to spread some money around, you got to guarantee a lot of money. You got to restructure a lot of money, and you do that by cutting a check and putting that into an escrow account, paying that player. So if they want to get back to prominence, they can. I think the defensive pieces are there. I love the Brock Bowers idea. Obviously, we'll get more into that later this offseason. But I honestly, if you get the right head coaches in there, and it's what I do think LA is a draw for, if not free agents, is I think LA is, I keep mentioning this guy, man, but Harbaugh is going to land somewhere. And he took the team when he last landed in the NFL. He took the 49ers, had a ton of pieces and a ton of talent, And they came out the next year and they busted the doors down and jumped out and, had a couple of good years there. I think the Chargers could be in the same exact position if they get the right head coach. And, Harbaugh brings in a defensive minded mentality, and then you hire an offensive coordinator that can do what he needs to do with Justin Herbert. I mean, the Chargers are like my second favorite team. So I wish they'd be good because it'd be more fun to root for them if they were. But they have all the talent. They just need the right coach and the right ownership mentality to take them to the next level, in my opinion.
And I think that's where I kind of sit. One of these days, we're going to get down to the nitty gritty of the coach's talent, or excuse me, the coaching versus the player's talent conversation we'll eventually have. I kind of sit in the middle between you and somebody else that we debate with all the time on coaching more important. Or he listened to the Draymond one and some the TikTok clips he'll go back to and he'll watch.
Okay.
But I think that I'm kind of sitting them in the middle between you two. He thinks it's 99% player, 1% coaching type situation. And I think which is sure, but I think the Chargers are a good example of that. That's just not true. They have all the talent in the world sitting there waiting and just not the right coaching to implement it. And then on top of that, you look at, I like it, but you have the Cowboys ex-offensive coordinator going from Dallas, and Dak is being looked at like he's garbage, he's horrible, he's throwing all these picks, he's atrocious, and then leaving, going to LA, and now Dak's an MVP candidate while Justin Herbert, not so much.
Yeah, did Kellen Moore show up in Buffalo on Sunday?
He may have. There was a lot of
That's what it looked like to me.
Rinky dink and pass offs, and it didn't look like. Dude, I've been saying it. You got to let Dak sling the rock, and I don't. It didn't feel like he had.
What's funny for the viewers behind the scenes, and my editor over here, Jacob, he'll conveniently not cut this clip for YouTube or TikTok or anything that gets the views. But I got the rundown for our podcast this week, and conveniently enough, there was nothing on there about the Cowboys. So I'm going to try to only take about 17 or 18 more shots this podcast because he didn't want to talk about it. And that's fine because the 49ers lose a big game. We ain't talking about it. But Kellen Moore looked like he showed up in Buffalo this week. That's all I'm saying.
I just want to say about the game that the reason why it's not on the podcast is because we talked about Dallas the first 2 weeks and we talked about the Niners the first 2 weeks. So then I cut them out. That's why I was worried about talking about the Eagles next. I'm like, damn, I really got to bring up the disgusting atmosphere of Philly in the podcast for 3 weeks.
It's noteworthy, man.
Yeah, unfortunately, gosh. Yeah. So I think that the Chargers are in a strange situation. Obviously, if and everything just kind of falls down on an if they get the right coaching and the right personnel in place, obviously they could take it far. And then looking at their own division, just like you said, we got the Chiefs, the Chargers, the Raiders, and the Broncos. We are probably going to end up talking about the Broncos here in the next coming weeks. Maybe at the end of the season, we can kind of take a look back at the Broncos specifically and see how the season went, because I think it's an interesting case study on from how poor Russell Wilson was last year and then starting off really poor and then kind of picking it up and playing better,
coaching
and turning the team around. I think it's something that we definitely have to talk about once it gets to the end of the season, because I think that's when it's kind of noteworthy. And then depends on what the Chiefs do next year, what the Chiefs add. If they add anything, they have to add stuff, but it depends on what they add, kind of sits on where they're going to end up placing in the division. If the Chargers go full in and they hire the right personnel and they draft correctly and everything kind of falls into place, we're looking at the Chargers 1, Chiefs 2, Broncos 3, Raiders 4. That's the one thing that's not going to change, is the Raiders 4. But but if the Chiefs go out and they make the right moves, it's still Chiefs 1, maybe Chargers 2. But if the Broncos make the right moves, then it's Broncos. So I think it's an interesting division on top of that. It's a tough division. It's a competitive division. If those 3 teams make the correct moves in the offseason, we're looking at the division being competitive again, outside the Raiders, obviously.
I think just to wrap that all up in a bow, because you're 100% right, and I don't come on here to agree with everything you say, so I'll transition away from that because you nailed that. My dark horse candidate, obviously I keep saying Harbaugh. I think he's a good coach. My dark horse candidate for the Chargers is Brian Flores. Now, I know he's got that thing with the league right now, but the defensive minded mentality to come in there with that talent that's already there. And the thing about, I'm going to mention him again. I apologize. Harbaugh, when he came to the 49ers, he got them all the blue work shirts. I know you've seen them. And he hung them like, go to work. You're a white collar worker, blue collar worker. He hung them on everybody's locker. It was the mentality he brought to the team. Brian Flores, that defense, that mentality with the good offensive coordinator, I would love to see that, assuming his thing with the league is wrapped up.
Right.
So,
well,
Chargers trending up in my